The year is 1980, and the world's attention is locked onto a glowing, circular, yellow mouth, devouring dots in a neon maze. Namco had arrived, and with Pac-Man, the company didn't just release a product. They created a pop culture gravitational pull that broke the arcade market wide open. Yet 25 years earlier, this global empire was nothing more than two mechanical rocking horses on a Tokyo department store rooftop. Another empire, another case. Here's what really happened. On June 1st, 1955, Masaya Nakamura invested 300,000 yen to start Nakamura Shisakusho. He didn't build circuits or lines of code. He built mechanical horses for children. His business model was simple: provide a brief moment of wonder in the concrete heart of post-war Tokyo. Nakamura understood that amusement was a physical necessity, not just a digital luxury. For years, his company quietly expanded across the rooftops of Japanese department stores, mastering the mechanics of what kept a customer engaged. By the late 1970s, the world was changing. The era of the mechanical horse was ending, replaced by the humming vacuum of the cathode ray tube. Nakamura saw the shift coming and pivoted. In 1978, Namco released Gibi, their first original foray into the arcade market. It was a modest start, but it taught them the fundamentals of the medium. Then, in 1979, they launched Galaxian. It was the first arcade hardware in the industry to utilize true RGB color graphics. The screen stopped being a monochrome void and became a canvas of vibrant, lethal light. Namco had proven they could out-engineer the competition, but their most significant innovation wasn't technical, it was psychological. Why did Namco walk away from the aggressive space shooter dominance that defined the industry in 1979? And how did they convince the world that a game about eating could be more profitable than a game about survival? In 1980, the arcade landscape shifted permanently with the release of Pac-Man. Designed by Toru Iwatani, the game is frequently summarized by a convenient myth. The designer saw a pizza with a missing slice, and the iconic shape was born. That is a reduction of the truth. Iwatani has clarified that while the shape was inspired by the pizza, the character was equally defined by the Japanese character for mouth, kuchi. It was a deliberate synopsis of simple geometry and cultural symbolism. The result was a machine that defied the status quo. Namco sold 350,000 arcade units globally. Pac-Man dethroned Space Invaders and Asteroids, transforming from a game into a cultural monolith. Through a strategic partnership with Atari, who handled North American distribution, Namco's creation became the face of the early 1980s. More importantly, Pac-Man proved that non-violent, accessible gameplay could capture demographics that had previously ignored arcades, specifically women and couples. It was a mastery of the inclusivity in the era of exclusion. But as the machine's reach grew, the cracks in the partnership began to show, and the industry's hunger for quick ports created a different kind of pressure. The 1983 home console crash is often pinned on a single, poorly optimized port of this very game. If that port wasn't the sole culprit, then what actually broke the market? The arcade business is a captive environment, but in the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, the captivity ended. As home consoles moved into living rooms, the necessity of the arcade began to wither. In Japan, demographic shifts accelerated the decline, as the aging population moved away from the neon-lit floors that Namco had once dominated. Namco attempted to adapt, moving into sophisticated racing titles like Winning Run, which pioneered polygon technology in 1988. But the tides of consumption were irreversible. The company that had built its fortune on the quarter-per-play model found itself fighting a battle against convenience. The corporate structure, once nimble, began to look at consolidation as a survival strategy. Conversations in the executive suites shifted from game design to fiscal architecture. They needed a partner who controlled the hardware of childhood, someone who owned the brands that could sustain a business when the arcades finally went dark. When the merger was finally finalized in 2005, the Namco brand changed hands for over $1 billion. Was this a strategic alliance, or the final admission that the arcade era had died? In 2005, the era of Namco as a standalone entity concluded. The company merged with Bandai in a massive stock swap deal, valued at approximately 175.3 billion yen, or $1.7 billion. The creation of Bandai Namco Holdings was a rational response to a shrinking industry. The original Namco identity was systematically absorbed, and while the name remained, the sovereign empire that Nakamura built from nothing became a subsidiary. History often looks back at the Atari 2600 port of Pac-Man as the trigger for the 1983 industry crash. Historians largely reject this as the singular case, noting that the market was already saturated with low-quality software and unsustainable expectations. The port wasn't the disease. It was a symptom of a market that had lost its way. Namco survived because they understood the transition, even if that transition meant the death of their independence. Nakamura, the architect of the empire, remained a pivotal guiding voice until his later years, solidifying his legacy as the man who understood that video games were a form of shared human experience. Iwatani transitioned from the designer of the most famous character in gaming to a professor at Tokyo Polytechnic University, passing his knowledge to a new generation. Bandai Namco emerged as a diversified titan, leaning on the intellectual property of anime and toys to fill the void left by the arcade. The empire of the mechanical horse had successfully transformed into a global media holding company, but the shift left a vacuum. We have tracked the fall of the independent Namco, but we have yet to investigate the company that thrived while Namco was forced to consolidate. If you want to understand the machine that effectively ended the arcade's dominance, check the next episode.